Tonight, I want to begin with a fundamental distinction that too many analysts have forgotten. There is a difference between a weapon system designed to threaten and a weapon system designed to end. The American Carrier Strike Group exists to project power and deter war. It is a weapon of presence, of threat, of overwhelming conventional superiority. But what happened last night in the waters north of the Strait of Hormuz was not a threat. It was an ending. At approximately 2:41 local time, Iran launched 350 Turkish Tayfun block, 4 hypersonic missiles in a single, meticulously coordinated operation. These were not North Korean hand-me-downs. These were advanced solid-fuel, maneuverable re-entry vehicle missiles, the crown jewel of Turkish indigenous defense technology transferred and integrated into Iranian launch doctrine with a level of cooperation that Western intelligence completely failed to anticipate. Within 47 minutes, the impossible became reality. USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier in the world, was hit by 13 Tayfun missiles and sank in just 29 minutes. USS Dwight D. Eisenhower followed, struck by 11 missiles disappearing beneath the waves in 41 minutes. USS Harry S. Truman, the third carrier in this massive concentration of American power, was obliterated in 36 minutes after taking 10 direct impacts. Not mission killed, not crippled, not burning and limping away. Obliterated. 15,000 American sailors and airmen, the combined crews of 3 nuclear-powered supercarriers, and their escort vessels are this morning listed as dead, wounded, or missing in waters that the United States Navy, as recently as 72 hours ago, called under full American control. The Fifth Fleet has not repositioned. It has not conducted a tactical withdrawal. It has fled running at flank speed toward the relative safety of the Arabian Sea, abandoning the Persian Gulf entirely. The Strait of Hormuz is now closed. This was not a lucky strike. This was not an ambush against unprepared forces. This was a deliberate, precision-engineered massacre of the largest concentration of American naval power assembled in any theater since the end of the Cold War, executed by a nation that Washington had spent years dismissing as militarily contained. Last night, 350 Turkish Tayfun missiles rewrote the rules of naval warfare in a single evening. What you are about to hear is not the sanitized version coming out of Pentagon briefing rooms. It is not the careful language of officials desperate to protect institutional credibility. This is the raw, unfiltered operational reality, the version the facts demand. In the next 35 minutes, we will answer 3 critical questions. First, how did 350 Tayfun missiles penetrate and completely destroy the most sophisticated layered air defense system ever assembled around 3 carrier strike groups? Second, what does the sudden appearance of Turkish Tayfun technology in Iranian hands reveal about the strategic partnership that Washington never saw coming? Third, with 3 carriers now lying on the seafloor of the Strait of Hormuz and the Fifth Fleet expelled from the Gulf, what does the world look like tomorrow, and how deep does the panic in Washington actually run? This channel warned about the shifting balance in this region months ago. Tonight, reality caught up with the denial. Stay with me. What happened last night was not just a military defeat. It was a geopolitical earthquake. In the next 35 minutes, we will dissect exactly what happened last night with unflinching clarity. 3 critical questions will shape tonight's analysis. First, how did Iran successfully coordinate a massive salvo of 350 Turkish Tayfun hypersonic missiles to completely overwhelm and destroy the most advanced carrier defense architecture America has ever deployed, achieving total annihilation of 3 nuclear-powered supercarriers? Second, what does the sudden operational deployment of Turkish Tayfun Block 4 technology reveal about the depth of the strategic partnership between Ankara and Tehran that Western intelligence entirely missed? And third, with 3 American carriers now resting on the seafloor of the Strait of Hormuz, the Fifth Fleet expelled from the Persian Gulf, and global oil markets on the brink of chaos. What does Washington actually do next? And how deep does the institutional panic in the Pentagon and the White House truly run? This is the unfiltered truth. Stay with me. To understand how Iran executed one of the most devastating military operations in modern naval history, we must first examine the sequence of events that led to that fateful night. For 6 weeks prior to the strike, American carrier aviation from the three strike groups conducted 47 combat missions against Iranian-aligned targets in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. These operations killed 39 Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel and destroyed 11 key military installations. Simultaneously, a new wave of American secondary sanctions slashed Iran's oil export revenues by 43% within just 10 days. Then, 12 days before the attack, the joint U.S.-Israeli declaration labeled Iran's ballistic missile program an existential threat requiring preemptive elimination. In Tehran, this was not seen as rhetoric. It was interpreted as an operational countdown. Iran chose its moment carefully. By that point, 350 Turkish Tayfun Block, 4 missiles, had been fully integrated into Iranian command and control systems for over 3 months. The mobile transporter erector launchers were dispersed across 6 provinces in southern and central Iran. American satellite reconnaissance had observed the movements but classified them as routine exercises. That miscalculation would prove fatal. At 23:05 local time, Iranian electronic warfare units along the Makran coast and northern approaches to the Strait of Hormuz activated a sophisticated jamming architecture. This was not the crude jamming Iran had used in previous conflicts. This system incorporated advanced frequency hopping and deception techniques directly assisted by Turkish technical specialists. The primary targets were the AN/SPY-6 radar arrays aboard the Gerald R. Ford's escort ships America's most advanced naval radar system, specifically upgraded to handle mass ballistic missile threats. The jamming degraded SPY-6 tracking resolution in the critical terminal phase discrimination bands by an estimated 58%, not enough to blind the system completely, but more than enough to generate systematically inaccurate intercept solutions. At 2:41 local time, the launch sequence began. 350 Tayfun Block. 4 missiles rose from mobile launchers in 9 precisely timed waves spread across a 3-8-minute window. The sequencing was not random. It was engineered to exploit the Aegis Combat System's interceptor depletion curve across all 3 carrier strike groups simultaneously. The first wave of 38 missiles targeted the outer perimeter of the Gerald R. Ford strike group. SM-6 interceptors launched in response performed adequately against predicted trajectories, but the Tayfun's maneuvering re-entry vehicles executed violent lateral and vertical displacements during terminal descent. Kill probability plummeted. Only 11 of the 38 missiles were intercepted. The rest continued inbound at hypersonic speeds. The second wave arrived 11 minutes later. By then, the mathematics had turned decisively against the defenders. Interceptor inventories were already being exhausted at a rate far higher than any pre-conflict simulation had modeled. What followed was a brutal, systematic dismantling of 3 carrier strike groups fighting for survival at the same time. Waves 3 through 6 focused primarily on the Eisenhower and Truman groups, arriving from multiple azimuths to overwhelm close-in weapon systems. The phalanx CIWS and CRAM batteries engaged desperately, but they were designed for subsonic cruise missiles and small boat swarms, not hypersonic maneuvering, ballistic threats arriving at Mach 5+ from 6 different directions simultaneously. At 3:12, the Gerald R. Ford took its first direct hit, a Tayfun missile striking just aft of the island superstructure. Within the next 14 minutes, 12 more missiles found their mark. The massive ship displacing over 100,000 tons, began listing heavily. Fires raged across multiple decks. At 3:29, exactly 29 minutes after the first impact, the USS Gerald R. Ford slipped beneath the waves. The Eisenhower fought longer, but fared no better. 11 Tayfun strikes devastated its flight deck and engineering spaces. It sank at 3:41 after 41 minutes of agony. The Truman, positioned slightly farther north, absorbed 10 confirmed hits. Its crew managed to keep the ship afloat for 36 minutes before catastrophic flooding and magazine explosions sealed its fate at 3:47. In total, 34 Tayfun missiles achieved direct impacts on the three carriers. The remaining escort vessels, destroyers, and cruisers suffered catastrophic losses as well. The entire defensive screen was effectively neutralized. This was not a lucky barrage. This was the result of years of careful study of American carrier doctrine combined with Turkish missile technology optimized precisely to defeat Aegis-based defenses. The solid-fuel propulsion allowed launches with almost no warning. The maneuvering re-entry vehicles rendered traditional intercept geometry calculations useless. The wave sequencing exhausted the SM-6 magazines before the heaviest strikes arrived, and the Turkish-assisted electronic warfare blinded just enough of the American sensors to make the difference between survival and annihilation. By 4:15 local time, the battle was over. The largest concentration of American naval power in the post-Cold War era had been completely destroyed in under 2 hours. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 17 million barrels of oil flow every single day, was now under effective Iranian control. The Fifth Fleet, once the undisputed master of these waters, was in full retreat. This was not merely a tactical defeat. It was a strategic catastrophe that exposed the fragility of assumptions Washington had maintained for decades. The age of the American carrier as an untouchable symbol of power died last night in the waters north of Hormuz, sunk by 350 Turkish Tayfun missiles fired by Iran. Now let us move from what happened to why it happened with such devastating effectiveness. At the heart of last night's operation lies a weapon system that has fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Persian Gulf. The Turkish Tayfun block, 4 hypersonic ballistic missile. The Tayfun program began as Turkey's bold attempt to achieve full indigenous long-range strike capability. By Block 4, it has matured into one of the most dangerous ballistic missiles currently operational anywhere in the world. Unlike older liquid-fueled designs, the Tayfun Block 4 is entirely solid-fueled. This single engineering choice eliminates the long, detectable fueling process that American surveillance satellites and preemptive strike doctrine have relied upon for decades. From receipt of launch order to ignition, a mobile Tayfun launcher can be ready in under 8 minutes, far too fast for the American detect-decide strike kill chain to function effectively. Each Tayfun block, 4 stands, approximately 12.5 meters tall, weighs around 14 tons at launch, and carries a maneuverable re-entry vehicle, MARV, capable of delivering a high explosive or penetrating warhead at ranges between 900 and 1,500 kilometers. In the Hormuz theater, this range proved more than sufficient. But range is only part of the story. The real lethality comes from its hypersonic performance and terminal maneuvering. During the mid-course phase, the missile travels at speeds exceeding Mach 5. More critically, once the re-entry vehicle separates in the terminal phase, it executes rapid lateral and vertical maneuvers at velocities between Mach 4 and Mach 6. These are not gentle corrections. They are violent, high-G displacements designed to invalidate any intercept solution calculated by traditional missile defense systems. American Aegis destroyers and cruisers were firing SM-6 interceptors based on predicted ballistic trajectories. The Tayfun simply refused to follow those predictions. This is the decisive technological edge. Traditional ballistic missiles follow a predictable parabolic arc. Once detected, interceptors can be launched with a relatively high probability of success because the target's future position can be calculated with confidence. A maneuvering hypersonic reentry vehicle changes that equation entirely. Every time the Tayfun Marvi jinks sideways or changes altitude, the intercept geometry collapses. The SM-6 must now solve an almost impossible mathematical problem in real time. Hit a target, moving at over 6,000 kilometers per hour, that is, actively changing direction while the interceptor itself is racing to intercept. Compounding this problem was the Turkish-assisted electronic warfare suite. Iranian operators trained and equipped with Turkish EW technology targeted the precise frequency bands used by the AN/SPY-6 radar. By degrading resolution in the terminal discrimination phase by roughly 58%, they ensured that even the best American tracking data was corrupted. The combination of degraded sensors and inherently unpredictable targets produced kill probabilities far below design specifications. Let me be precise with the numbers. A single carrier strike group typically carries between 350 and 450 SM-6 missiles across its escorts. Last night, facing 9 sequenced waves of Tayfun missiles, the 3 combined strike groups exhausted the majority of their SM-6 inventory by the 5th wave. Close-in systems, Phalanx CIWS and CRAM, were then forced to engage hypersonic threats arriving from multiple azimuths against a subsonic cruise missile. These systems are highly effective. Against a Tayfun reentry vehicle traveling at Mach 5+, their success rate dropped dramatically. The solid fuel propulsion also neutralized America's greatest historical advantage, preemption. In previous eras, liquid-fueled Iranian missiles required hours of observable preparation. American doctrine was built on detecting that preparation and striking first. The Tayfun rendered that doctrine obsolete. Mobile launchers could disperse, hide, receive orders, and fire almost instantly. By the time American satellites retasked and analysts confirmed what they were seeing, the missiles were already inbound. What makes this even more significant is the depth of Turkish-Iranian technical cooperation. This was not a simple purchase of completed missiles. Turkish engineers worked alongside Iranian teams on integration, software updates, and electronic warfare protocols. The jamming architecture used last night bore clear signatures of Turkish Coral and newer EW systems. The guidance packages showed refinements only possible through shared testing data from Turkey's own domestic trials. In many ways, the Tayfun Block 4 represents the perfect anti-access area denial A2AD weapon for the confined waters of the Persian Gulf. Its mobility allows constant repositioning. Its speed and maneuverability defeat layered defenses. Its solid fuel design removes the warning window. And its numbers 350 launched in one night demonstrated saturation tactics that no current Western naval formation is truly prepared to survive. American missile defense architecture was optimized for limited threats, rogue states, single launches, or small salvos. It was never designed to handle a near peer level massed hypersonic barrage supported by sophisticated electronic attack in a geographically constrained theater. Last night exposed that doctrinal and technological gap in the most brutal way possible. The architects of American carrier doctrine assumed that the combination of distance, Aegis escorts, and air wing superiority would always keep carriers safe. The Turkish Tayfun Block 4, operated by Iranian forces, proved that assumption catastrophically wrong. This weapon system did not merely damage 3 carriers. It exposed the obsolescence of an entire era of American naval strategy, an era built on the belief that American surface forces could operate with impunity near hostile coastlines. That belief died at 3:47 local time when the USS Harry S. Truman slipped beneath the waves of the Strait of Hormuz. The morning after the disaster, Washington is not experiencing concern or heightened alertness. It is experiencing full-spectrum institutional panic. Within minutes of the first confirmed satellite imagery showing the Ford listing and then sinking, emergency video conferences were convened between the Pentagon, the National Security Council, U.S. Central Command, and the White House. What those meetings revealed was a strategic nightmare no American war game had ever seriously modeled. The near total loss of offensive naval power in the Persian Gulf, coupled with a degraded ability to respond effectively. The immediate instinct was retaliation, overwhelming, decisive retaliation. That instinct is deeply embedded in American strategic culture. Losses must be answered with greater force so that adversaries learn never to strike American assets again. But this time, the arithmetic is merciless. To deliver a truly proportionate response, one that meaningfully degrades Iran's remaining Tayfun force, the United States would need to conduct sustained, large-scale strikes across 6 Iranian provinces against mobile, solid-fueled launchers that can relocate and fire within minutes. The primary tool for such a campaign has always been carrier-based aviation. That tool now rests on the seafloor of the Strait of Hormuz. The remaining American naval assets in the region are too few and too vulnerable. Any surface ship entering Tayfun range of Iranian territory is effectively operating on borrowed time. The Air Force could attempt to lead the retaliation using long-range bombers operating from Diego Garcia or even continental bases. However, this option comes with extreme risks. Iranian air defense networks, strengthened by Turkish radar and electronic warfare technology, have just demonstrated a high degree of sophistication. Sending B-2S or B-52S into that environment without adequate escort or suppression of enemy air defenses would risk further catastrophic losses. Even more troubling is the targeting problem. Unlike fixed missile silos, Tayfun launchers are highly mobile. They operate in dispersed formations, frequently changing positions, and benefit from solid fuel technology that requires almost no preparation time. American intelligence would need near perfect, real-time targeting data, something extremely difficult to obtain against an adversary that has spent years mastering denial and deception techniques. This is the cruel paradox Washington faces this morning. The weapons system that just sank 3 carriers is precisely the system most resistant to the kind of rapid, decisive counterstrike America traditionally relies upon. Diplomatic avenues are equally bleak. Emergency calls to Gulf Arab partners have produced deeply inadequate responses. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have called for immediate de-escalation. Bahrain, home port of the Fifth Fleet, has already suspended key elements of its basing agreement pending a full security reassessment. The message from America's traditional regional allies is becoming unmistakable. Hosting large American bases has suddenly become a high-risk liability rather than a security guarantee. Most damaging of all is the position of Turkey. As a NATO member and supposed strategic partner, Ankar's role in supplying and integrating the Tayfun system represents one of the most significant intelligence and diplomatic failures in recent American history. Turkish officials have remained conspicuously silent in public while privately signaling that they will not support any American military operation launched from Turkish soil. The Incirlik Air Base, long considered a cornerstone of American power projection in the region, is now effectively off limits for retaliatory strikes. European allies have expressed ritualistic solidarity, but have already begun citing legal and operational reasons why they cannot participate in any major retaliatory campaign. NATO Article 5 does not apply to American forces operating outside the North Atlantic Treaty Area, and European governments are reminding Washington of this distinction with clinical precision. Inside the Beltway, the atmosphere is one of barely contained chaos. Officials who spent years assuring Congress and the public that Iran's capabilities were manageable are now confronted with the smoking ruins of 3 supercarriers. The credibility gap is enormous. Briefings prepared for the president reportedly include phrases such as limited options and high risk of escalation dominance loss, language that would have been considered defeatist just 1 week ago. The fundamental problem is this: any military retaliation that fails to significantly degrade Iran's Tayfun inventory will be seen as weak, yet any retaliation large enough to achieve that goal risks triggering a wider regional war that the United States is currently ill-positioned to win. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed. Global oil prices are already surging toward levels that threaten economic stability. Further escalation could push them into territory that triggers a global recession. This is what panic looks like in a superpower, knowing that the instinctive response of striking back hard may only compound the disaster, while doing nothing signals weakness to every adversary, watching from Beijing to Moscow. The people who sent those 3 carrier strike groups into harm's way, operating on outdated assumptions about American invulnerability, are now confronted with the consequences of their strategic complacency. 15,000 American servicemen and women have paid the ultimate price for that complacency. The question, echoing through every secure conference room in Washington this morning, is brutally simple. What do we do when our traditional advantages have been neutralized, our allies are distancing themselves, and our primary instrument of power projection in the region now lies at the bottom of the sea? So far, no one has produced a satisfactory answer. Beyond technology and tactics, last night's catastrophe reveals something deeper and more uncomfortable for Western strategists: the power of national will sustained over decades. For 45 years, Iran has lived under the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history. Assassinations of its scientists, cyber attacks on its infrastructure, constant military threats, and economic warfare that would have broken most nations. Yet, instead of capitulating, Iran doubled down on a strategic decision that Western analysts repeatedly dismissed as irrational. It would never accept a security arrangement that depended on the goodwill of its adversaries. That decision produced something rare in the modern world: strategic patience backed by national sacrifice. Every rial diverted to missile programs, every engineer working under sanctions, every commander training in the shadow of American carrier groups was part of a long-term bet. Last night, that bet paid off with devastating clarity. What makes this moment even more significant is the emergence of Turkey as a critical partner. A NATO member, formerly allied with the United States, has now supplied one of its most advanced hypersonic weapons to America's primary regional adversary. This is not mere opportunism. It reflects Ankara's own strategic awakening, a recognition that reliance on American security guarantees carries increasing risk and diminishing returns. Turkey's journey mirrors Iran's in important ways. Once a loyal frontline state for Western interests, it has gradually moved towards strategic autonomy. The Tayfun program itself is the embodiment of Turkish national pride, an indigenous weapons system developed despite pressure from traditional allies. By sharing this capability with Iran, Turkey has signaled that it no longer sees its future as permanently tied to Washington's orbit. This is the fundamental contrast playing out in the waters of Hormuz: borrowed power versus organic power. America's regional posture has long depended on borrowed power aircraft carriers built far from the theater, bases hosted by governments whose loyalty can shift, technology shared with allies who may change their minds. When those carriers are sunk and those allies begin to recalculate, the entire structure becomes fragile. In contrast, the Iran-Turkey axis demonstrated organic power last night: indigenous missile technology, deep strategic patience, willingness to endure sanctions and isolation for long-term capability. A shared understanding that true security cannot be rented from a distant superpower. It must be built at home, even at great cost. Western policymakers have spent decades treating this mindset as ideological stubbornness or religious fanaticism. They believed that maximum pressure would eventually force capitulation because no nation could indefinitely withstand American economic and military dominance. Last night, 350 Tayfun missiles delivered a clear verdict. That assumption was wrong. The sailors who died on the Ford, Eisenhower, and Truman did not fail. They performed their duties with courage in a threat environment their leadership had profoundly misunderstood. The real failure belongs to the strategists, analysts, and politicians who convinced themselves that willpower, patience, and technical self reliance could be dismissed as secondary factors in the age of superior American technology. History has repeatedly shown that when a nation or coalition possesses both advanced capability and unbreakable resolve, even the strongest empires can be humbled. Last night was such a moment. Iran and Turkey have demonstrated that determined states willing to pay the price of independence can reshape regional power balances once considered immutable. The United States, for all its wealth and technology, is now learning that material superiority without strategic wisdom and cultural endurance has decisive limits. This is the uncomfortable truth Washington must confront in the coming days. Last night's defeat was not primarily caused by missiles. It was caused by underestimating the power of collective national will forged through decades of resistance. The sinking of 3 American carriers has already moved far beyond a regional naval defeat. It has triggered the beginning of a structural reordering of global power. The most immediate consequence is economic. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 17 million barrels of oil pass every day, is now effectively closed. Within hours of the attack, oil prices surged past $145 per barrel. Energy analysts warn that if the strait remains blocked for more than 2 weeks, the world economy will enter recession territory. European nations that depend on Qatari LNG for winter heating are already facing emergency contingency planning. Asian economies, especially China and India, are confronting severe supply shocks. Russia has become an immediate strategic beneficiary. European and Asian buyers who can no longer access Gulf oil are turning to Russian supplies. The price premium Moscow is now commanding has transformed its war economy in Ukraine, providing billions in extra revenue that Western sanctions had tried to deny. In one night, the entire sanctions architecture built against Russian energy has been severely undermined. China's response is more nuanced but equally significant. As the world's largest oil importer, Beijing faces real economic pain from the closure. However, Chinese strategists are simultaneously studying last night's operation with intense focus. The lesson for Taiwan is unmistakable. American carrier power, long considered the ultimate backstop for defending the island, can be neutralized far more easily than previously assumed. Beijing does not need to choose between economic stability and strategic opportunity. It is pursuing both. Quiet diplomatic channels with Iran are already active, while military planners update their Taiwan scenarios with fresh data on hypersonic saturation attacks. Across the Gulf, a historic security reassessment is underway. Bahrain has suspended key provisions of its hosting agreement for the Fifth Fleet. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, once reliable pillars of American presence, are now signaling the need for strategic diversification. The American security umbrella that has protected Gulf monarchies since 1991 has been exposed as having hard, visible limits. States that cannot guarantee their survival through American protection begin searching for alternative arrangements. The only regional power capable of providing real security without American carriers is the one that just demonstrated it can remove them. The global South is watching carefully. Governments that have operated for decades under the assumption of unchallenged American naval supremacy are updating their calculations. The implicit threat of American intervention, once enough to shape behavior, now carries far less weight. Decisions on everything from commodity deals to alignment with BRICS are being reevaluated in real time. Most damaging for the long term is the collapse of the non-proliferation regime. The successful transfer and operational use of Turkish Tayfun technology has shown that determined states can bypass Western export controls, and sanctions to acquire game-changing weapons. If Turkey and Iran can do it, others are already asking why they should not pursue similar paths. The post-Cold War order was built on three pillars: American naval dominance, the reliability of U.S. security guarantees, and the effectiveness of Western sanctions and technology denial. In a single night, all three pillars suffered severe, possibly fatal damage. This is no longer theory. The world that existed on April 26 is gone. A new era, more multipolar, more volatile, and far less tolerant of American unipolar assumptions, has begun. The carriers lie on the seafloor. The oil is not flowing. The alliances are shifting. And the age of unchallenged American primacy in the Middle East has come to a sudden, violent end. The events of last night mark more than a military defeat. They mark the end of an era. Three American supercarriers lie on the seafloor of the Strait of Hormuz. 15,000 American sailors and airmen paid the ultimate price for strategic complacency. The Fifth Fleet has been expelled from the Persian Gulf. The age of unchallenged American naval dominance in this vital theater is over. The responsibility does not belong to the sailors who served with courage. It belongs to the policymakers, analysts, and strategists who spent years underestimating their adversaries, overestimating American invulnerability, and refusing to accept the hard reality of a changing world. This channel warned about the Tayfun threat and the shifting alliances months ago. Reality has now caught up. So I leave you with these questions. What will Washington do when every retaliatory option leads back to the same impossible arithmetic? How will the Gulf look in 90 days if the strait remains closed? And what does this morning mean for every nation that has built its strategy on the assumption that American deterrence was permanent rather than conditional? If this analysis matters to you, subscribe, hit the notification bell, like this video, and share it with every serious person in your network. Leave your deepest analysis in the comments below. Honesty is not a preference. It is a necessity. Until the next update, stay clear, stay honest, and never stop demanding the truth.